Secretary Kristi Noem was in front of the House Homeland Security Committee today, testifying on worldwide threats. But for many lawmakers, the threat was her, as they demanded answers from the DHS secretary on a wide range of her agency's actions, including the decisions behind who to detain and deport.
Madam Secretary, how many United States military veterans?
Tonight, we are witnessing a moment that has never occurred in the history of the United States. 8 members of the president's own cabinet have reportedly confirmed his unfitness for office under oath. The constitutional threshold for a forced removal under the 25th Amendment is now within reach. This is the story of an administration in crisis and the legal mechanisms that could reshape the American presidency forever. Tonight, we begin with a development that is as urgent as it is unprecedented. For the first time since the 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967, the United States is facing the very real possibility of a sitting president being removed by his own hand-picked cabinet. According to sources and ongoing testimony before the House Oversight Committee,
the military's deadly airstrikes on suspected drug boats in the Caribbean. We've now learned all 11 people on a boat killed in a strike in September were on the list of military targets.
8 cabinet officials have now confirmed that President Donald Trump is unfit to continue his duties. This is not a number pulled from thin air. 8 is the specific threshold required by Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to constitute a majority of the 15 principal officers of the executive departments. The testimony we are seeing is described by lawmakers as damning. It involves senior officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and Health Secretary RFK Jr. These individuals, appointed by the president himself, are testifying under oath about decisions that they say have crossed the line into illegality. The most serious of these developments involves unauthorized military strikes against Venezuela. The sources indicate that these strikes were ordered without the constitutionally required briefings to Congress, a direct violation of the War Powers Act. Defense Secretary Hegseth testified that there was internal panic within the Department of Defense because officials knew the strikes were illegal, yet the president proceeded regardless. This testimony suggests a pattern of bypassing normal channels and ignoring legal procedures. Beyond the military strikes, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has testified about questionable pardon schemes, specifically involving the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted on drug trafficking charges.
Earlier this year, you deported him to Korea, a country he hasn't lived in since he was 7 years old. The man behind you, please stand up, sir. His name is Jim Brown from Troy, Missouri. He is a Navy combat veteran who served our country in the Gulf War.
Lawmakers are now investigating whether these pardons were used as leverage for political support. This convergence of military aggression, the bypassing of Congress, and the use of executive pardons as political tools has led to what is being called an explosive series of hearings. To understand how we reach this point, we have to look at the mechanics of our Constitution. The sources explain that there are 2 primary ways to remove a president: impeachment or the 25th Amendment. While most Americans are familiar with impeachment, the 25th Amendment is a much faster but also much more complex process. It was designed for dire circumstances where a president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Section 4 of that amendment is often referred to as the nuclear option because it allows for the removal of a president against his will. The process begins in the executive branch, not the legislative branch. It requires a written declaration signed by the vice president and a majority of the cabinet. Once that document is delivered to the leaders of Congress,
and realistic approach to national defense.
The annual forum that examines defense strategies comes as Hegseth and the Department of War are catching heat, accused of possible war crimes after a second strike on a suspected drug-running boat in the Caribbean killed 2 survivors.
Members of Congress, the president is immediately stripped of his powers, and the vice president becomes the acting president. The sources make it clear that the vice president is the indispensable actor in this scenario. Without his signature, the 25th Amendment cannot be invoked. But the story does not end with a single signature. If the president challenges the declaration, as the sources suggest he would, the issue moves to Congress. Congress then has 21 days to decide the matter. To permanently remove the president, 2/3 of both the House and the Senate must vote that he is unfit. This is a higher bar than impeachment, which only requires a simple majority in the House. Now, let's look closer at the testimony that has brought us to this brink. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, told the House Oversight Committee that the president used what he called riot leverage. This involved allegedly threatening domestic chaos if the administration did not support his military strikes in Venezuela. This testimony echoes the pressure tactics seen during the events of 6th of January 2021, when the sources state the nation witnessed an attack on the Capitol by insurrectionists incited by the president. During that historical event, a violent crowd breached the Capitol, stole files, and forced members of Congress to hide in fear for their lives. The sources remind us that on that day in 2021, the president encouraged his supporters to stop the certification of the Electoral College and defend his claim to a second term. The 2021 House Resolution 21 even called on the then vice president to activate the 25th Amendment, arguing that the president had demonstrated an absolute inability to discharge his duties, including the duty to respect a peaceful transfer of power. Today, those same legal arguments are being resurrected in light of the new cabinet testimony. Secretary Noem's testimony adds another layer to this crisis. She was questioned by the House Homeland Security Committee regarding her AI's actions, including the deportation of military veterans. In one specific case, a combat veteran and Purple Heart recipient who served in the Gulf War was deported to Korea, a country he had not lived in since he was 7 years old. While Noem claimed the agency does not deport veterans, the man's family was present in the hearing room to challenge that assertion. This has led to accusations from lawmakers that the DHS is engaging in actions that are constitutionally unconscionable. The testimony of RFK Jr. further confirms a pattern of solo decision-making. He admitted that the president frequently announced major policies on social media without consulting the relevant departments or following legal requirements. The sources point out that in government process matters. There are procedural safeguards and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent a single individual from making up policy on the fly. By bypassing these channels, the president was effectively operating outside the law. While the 25th Amendment process is unfolding, the sources indicate that the House is also moving forward with impeachment. House Resolution 353 contains 7 articles of impeachment, including charges of tyranny, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. As of mid-December, more than 140 members of Congress have already voted to advance these articles. This shows significant momentum, although a simple majority of 218 votes is still required to pass impeachment in the House. There is a major difference in the lasting consequences of these two paths. If a president is removed via the 25th Amendment, he remains a private citizen and can legally run for office again in the future. However, if a president is impeached and then convicted by the Senate, the Constitution allows for a lifetime ban from ever holding federal office again. Furthermore, an impeached and removed president loses significant perks under the former President's Act, including an annual pension that was valued at approximately $219,000 as of 2021. However, even if removed via impeachment, a former president and their spouse receive Secret Service protection for life. We must also consider the historical context provided by the sources regarding presidential disability. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967 to resolve issues that arose after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Before that, there were several instances where presidents were severely disabled, but the vice president did not assume power. For example, President James Garfield lingered for 79 days after being shot in 1881, but the vice president did not act. President Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1919 that left him partially paralyzed for the remainder of his term, yet his condition was kept secret from the public. President Eisenhower also suffered several health crises, which led him to create informal agreements with Vice President Nixon for the temporary transfer of power. The sources explain that while the 25th Amendment was intended for physical or mental incapacity, its language is intentionally vague. It uses the phrase, unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Legal scholars have argued for decades that this could apply to a situation where a president is abusing power in such a way that they are no longer capable of fulfilling their constitutional obligations. This is exactly what Democrats in Congress are now arguing. They contend that the illegal military strikes and the bypassing of Congress constitute a functional inability to serve as president. The political implications of this crisis are massive. Midterm polls already show the Republican Party tanking by 12 points nationally. Cracks are forming within the president's own party. Senator Josh Hawley and his faction have been demanding the president's resignation over the Venezuela raid and the pardon deals. Hawley is using every procedural tool available to block the president's agenda, arguing that the president has lost the confidence of his own administration. This puts Vice President J.D. Vance in an almost impossible position. If he invokes the 25th Amendment, he becomes the acting president immediately. This would make him the most powerful person in the world overnight. However, the sources note that it would also make him a traitor in the eyes of the president's loyal base. If he does not act and the president continues to make illegal decisions, Vance will own every resulting scandal. He is currently weighing whether to pull the trigger on a process that has never been used to remove a president against their will in American history. The president's response to these developments has been characteristically combative. On social media, he has called the actions of his cabinet treason and a coup. He has accused Democrats of weaponizing the 25th Amendment for political purposes. However, as the sources point out, it is difficult to call it a coup when the concerns are being raised by the president's own appointees, the very people he chose for their loyalty. These are not random politicians. They are officials who were supposed to be his closest allies. The evidence against the president is not limited to public testimony. There are reports of subpoenaed emails from the classified documents investigation that allegedly show cabinet members discussing the president's conduct in private. These emails purportedly suggest that cabinet officials believed the president was obstructing justice, hiding evidence, and making decisions that put national security at risk. If the public testimony is combined with these private communications, the case for unfitness becomes even stronger. Beyond the 25th Amendment and impeachment, the president is facing a mountain of other legal challenges. Federal prosecutors are reportedly sitting on evidence regarding a tax fraud scheme and an offshore billions investigation involving shell companies used to hide income. State prosecutors in New York and Georgia are also pursuing their own charges. The sources describe this as the final nail in the coffin for a presidency that is already under extreme stress. The president's strategy throughout these investigations has been to delay, deny, and deflect. He has attempted to delay legal cases until after the next election, deny the evidence by calling it fake news, and deflect blame onto his political enemies. But that strategy relies on a loyal base and a united party. With Republicans in Congress looking at catastrophic poll numbers and cabinet officials testifying under oath, that unity is fracturing. If the 25th Amendment is invoked, the clock starts immediately. Congress would have to decide if the president is fit to serve. During those 21 days, the president has no power. He is essentially suspended while the vice president serves as acting president. Even if the president survives the eventual vote in Congress, his presidency would be effectively over. His own cabinet would have declared him unfit, and his own party would have considered removing him. This situation also intersects with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which has been used in various states to challenge the president's eligibility for the ballot. While the Supreme Court ruled in March 2024 that states cannot disqualify a presidential candidate under Section 3 without congressional action, the debate over whether the events of 6th of January constitute an insurrection continues to follow the president. The sources note that the House Select Committee referred him for prosecution under multiple criminal statutes, including one prohibiting insurrection. The tension in Washington is palpable. We are watching a constitutional stress test in real time. The sources describe this as chaos and unprecedented. We have a president who is reportedly making solo illegal military decisions while his cabinet officials panic behind the scenes. We have a vice president facing a career-defining choice between loyalty and the nuclear option of the 25th Amendment. And we have a Congress that is moving forward with impeachment even as the midterm elections loom. As we follow these developments, it is important to remember the words of those who were in the Capitol during the 2021 attack. Representative Jaime Racine, a constitutional scholar, stated that the president is not meeting his oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. He argued that the president failed to protect the republic against domestic insurrection and seditious violence. Today, lawmakers are using that same logic to argue that the president's current actions, specifically the unauthorized military strikes and bypassing of legal procedures, show he is functionally incapable of serving. The next few days and weeks will be critical. We are waiting to see if Vice President Vance will sign the declaration. We are waiting for more cabinet officials to testify. And we are watching the polls to see if the American public believes that this administration can still govern. The sources tell us that if the 25th Amendment is used to remove the president, it will set a new precedent for how future cabinets can check a president they believe is acting outside the law. This isn't just about policy disagreements or political rivalry. The sources emphasize that these are questions of law and constitutional duty. The testimony from Pete Hegseth and Kristi Noem isn't about whether they like the president's goals. It's about whether they believe he is breaking the law to achieve them. When a Secretary of Defense testifies that military strikes were ordered in violation of the War Powers Act, that is a matter of legal fact, not opinion. The Republican Party is now facing a choice of two evils. They can remove the president now and face a backlash from his loyal base, or they can stay tied to him and face a landslide defeat in the midterms. Some Republicans are starting to believe that removing him now is the only way to save their seats and the party's future. This fracture is being led by conservative figures who still support the president's policies but believe he has become too toxic to be the face of the movement. In the House of Representatives, the debate is equally fierce. During the January 2021 hearings, some Republicans argued that using the 25th Amendment was a grotesque abuse and that the amendment was never intended as a political weapon. They argued that it should only be used for physical or mental incapacity, such as a serious illness or injury. These same arguments are being made today by the president's defenders in Congress. They claim that Democrats are twisting the amendment to use it for political ends. But the counter-argument, as stated by Representative Rasheen, is that incapacity is different from disability. A president can have a physical disability and be a great leader like Franklin Roosevelt. Incapacity, however, is a total inability to conform one's conduct to the rule of law and the Constitution. This is the standard that lawmakers are now applying to the current situation. They argue that a president who ignores the War Powers Act and bypasses the cabinet is functionally incapacitated from serving in a constitutional democracy. The sources also provide a look at the personal toll of these events. During the Noem hearing, a veteran's family stood in the room to represent the human cost of current deportation policies. Lawmakers described the trauma of the January 2021 attack and the ongoing fear that such violence could return. There is a sense of exhaustion in the halls of power as the country moves from one crisis to another. The sources describe a nation that is divided and looking for answers. As this script reaches its conclusion, the central question remains, what happens next? If the vice president and 8 cabinet members sign the declaration tonight, the president's power vanishes instantly. If they hesitate, the impeachment process will continue its slow march through the House. Either way, the presidency of Donald Trump is facing its most severe challenge to date. The 25th Amendment was created to ensure that the United States always has a functioning executive. It was built for the dark moments of history when a leader can no longer lead. Whether this current moment meets that definition is now the subject of a fierce constitutional struggle. The testimony is on the record. The legal articles are drawn and the political stakes could not be higher. To help you understand this, think of the 25th Amendment as a safety valve on a high-pressure engine. It isn't meant to be used often, and using it is a sign that something is seriously wrong with the machine. But if the pressure gets too high and the other controls fail, it is the only thing that can keep the whole system from exploding. We are currently watching to see if the engineers of our democracy will finally pull that lever. This has been a comprehensive look at the crisis currently unfolding in Washington. We will continue to monitor the testimony and any move toward the invocation of the 25th Amendment. The sources show us a government at a crossroads where the law and political reality are colliding in a way we have never seen before. The historical documents from 2021 remind us that this is not the first time the 25th Amendment has been discussed in relation to this president. But the new testimony from his own cabinet suggests that the current situation is far more advanced than anything we have seen in the past. The presence of 8 cabinet members willing to testify about illegal acts creates a legal reality that cannot be easily dismissed. As the House Resolution 353 advances and as the 25th Amendment looms, the future of the American presidency hangs in the balance. The sources describe this as a moment where American democracy is being stress-tested like never before. We will have to wait and see if the system's safeguards are strong enough to withstand the pressure. The details of the Hegst testimony, the Nome deportations, and the RFK Jr. admissions provide a factual basis for the current alarm. These are documented events that have led 8 senior officials to question the president's fitness. This is no longer a matter of partisan debate. It is a crisis of the executive branch itself. The differences between impeachment and removal via the 25th Amendment are stark, both in terms of the process and the consequences. One path is a slow legislative trial. The other is a swift executive intervention. Both are currently being pursued at the same time. As we wrap up, let's keep in mind the words of the sources regarding the 25th Amendment's intent. It was designed to preserve the integrity of the office and the continuity of government. Whether it is used as intended or seen as a political weapon will be decided by the actions of the Cabinet and Congress in the coming days. The sources indicate that the political fallout for the Republican Party is already being felt in the polls. The fracturing of the party led by figures like Josh Hawley shows that the president's support is no longer absolute, even among his former allies. The path forward is fraught with risk for everyone involved. For Vice President Vance, the choice is between a potential presidency as acting president and the risk of being seen as a traitor by the MAGA base. For the cabinet, the choice is between loyalty and their oath of office. And for the country, the choice is how to navigate a crisis that has no historical equal. The sources tell a story of a president who pushed too far, bypassing the very people he appointed to help him govern. Now those people are the ones who hold the key to his removal. The 25th Amendment, once a footnote in constitutional history, has become the most important law in the land. We will keep you updated as this story develops. The hearings continue.